This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abam, take 2. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the International Shimru Keep It Lamed Tes Malachos program. We're amazingly up to the 9th Malacha. We actually skipped Toichein, and the reason we skipped Toichein is because we are doing 3 weeks in a row of Malachos that are basically very similar to each other, almost identical. And the Gemara in Shabbos even asks, why do I need 3 Malachos? Winnowing, selecting, and grinding, they all seem to be the exact same Malacha. So we're going to learn today about the Malacha of Merakeid, Sifting, which is the 9th Malacha. And as we mentioned, we skipped Toichein, but we did do Bishul. So it's we skipped Toichein, but we did Bishul. So 9 Malachos in 9 weeks, and we're moving right along. Now, Sifting was most certainly in the Mishkan. Where was Sifting in the Mishkan? Sifting was in the Mishkan, where once the herbs were ground, so they would take the samamanim, they would take the herbs, and they would grind them, and they would mix it with water to create a paste. However, before they make the paste, they need to cleanse it from impurities. So this is already the 3rd time that there is a malacha of purifying, selecting, sifting. Number 1, we had zoira, winnowing, where the wind is going to carry away the refuse. And then we had boirer, where you're going to take out the pebbles, you're going to take out the soil. And now we have Merakeid, where you're going to take out any impurities that may have mixed into the mixture. Okay, so here we go. What is the Av Malacha of Merakeid? The Rambam paskins in the Mishnah Torah, HaMerakeid Kigroigeres Chayev. One who sifts even the size of a dried fig is Chayev. What is the Tolda? Comes the Rambam. By the way, do you have the source material? Are you on the list? You get the sources? Some of you shake your head, yeah. Some of you shake your head, no. If you're not on the list, you need to get on the list. So look at this Rambam. The Rambam says in Mishnah Torah, Perek Ches Halacha Yud Aleph, V'chein haboirer shmorim, one who selects refuse, mitay chamashkin, from a liquid, hareza toldois boirer. That is a tolda either of boirer or toldois Merakeid, or a tolda of Merakeid. Now, what does the Rambam mean? Either it's a tolda of boirer, or it's a tolda of Merakeid. What do you mean either one or the other? And as we're going to see, it is machloikis between the Beis Yosef and the Bir Halacha, whether the Rambam means both, or one or the other. So one who selects and cleanses from a liquid the sediment, it's a tolda of boirer, or it's a tolda Merakeid. Because zoira, boirer, Merakeid are all similar to each other. And why do we call them 3 separate malachos? Because anything that existed in the Mishkan is considered a malacha. Okay, very nice. What about the Isurei D'Rabbanan? So, the Rambam continues, one who strains sediments, it's a tolda of boirer or Merakeid, like we just said. Therefore, even though you're allowed to strain clear wine or clear water with a handkerchief or with a basket, you cannot make a cavity in the handkerchief like you do during the week, because you're going to come to strain with a strainer. Also, you cannot suspend a strainer the way you do during the week. Maybe you will come to strain. Fine. Then the Rambam says,
filter clear wine anyway?
What?
Why would you want to filter clear wine anyway?
Like a double insurance. In other words, it's drinkable as is, and maybe it will even be absolutely purified. You ever see on these beverages they advertise triple filtered? Well, why they triple? If you need to filter a beverage 3 times, maybe I don't want to drink it, But somehow it adds something, but it's not really discernible what the level of cleansing that's taking place. So in other words,
something's coming out, isn't it?
Nah, maybe. You know what it's like? I'll give you an example. Most faucets have an aerator on it, right? And often before Pesach, people take it out. Really, it should be koshered. And most of the time, when you take out the aerator, you're not going to find like pebbles in the aerator. So what is it there for? Just in case. So are you allowed to use your faucet on Shabbos? The answer is yeah, because whatever the aerator is filtering out, it's not really a discernible filtering. So that's sort of analogous to this case. You want to strain clear wine, or you want to strain clear liquid. You're allowed to do it, but don't do it the way you do it during the week. Now the Rambam says, Merakeid is one of the avos malachos, sifting. Therefore, you're not allowed to sift straw with a sieve, and you cannot put the sieve that has straw in a high place so that the chaff will fall down, because that's like Merakeid. Okay, so now we come to a subject we discussed briefly in the previous weeks, and we need to establish a fundamental machlokes between the Eglei Tal and the Shavisas Shabbos regarding how do you categorize the Lametes Malachos. Okay, so this is a very basic share. This is a share that has ramifications to really all Lametes Malachos, and in determining what is the distinguishing characteristic of a malacha, so that we know that if other activities have that distinguishing characteristic, it would fall under malacha A or malacha B. Okay, the Gemara Masechta Shabbos Ayin Gimel Amud Beis says that Zoira, Boirer, Merakeid are all the same thing. So why are they listed separately? The Gemara says whatever is in the Mishkan is listed. Now, we learned that there are two ways to understand how to categorize malacha, and it's based on a stira in Rashi's Masechta Shabbos. Rashi Ayin Gimel with Rashi and Ayin Hey Amud Beis. Rashi Ayin Gimel says as follows: Hazoira, what is winnowing? Says Rashi, berachas l'ruach, with a pitchfork in the wind. Okay, so Zoira, you use a pitchfork. Boirer, psoiles biyadav, you take out the refuse in your hand. So boirer, you use your hand. Merakeid, benafa asiv. According to Rashi seems to identify that the way to categorize malachos is determined by the tool which is used to perform the malacha. Zoira, you use a pitchfork. Boirer, you use your hands. And Merakeid, you use a sieve. So therefore, now we know, according to Rashi, l'chayra, anytime you use a sieve, it doesn't matter what you're using the sieve on, it would be Merakeid. Anytime you use your hand, it doesn't matter what it would be on, it would be boirer. Anytime you use a pitchfork, even whatever it may be for, it would be zoira. However, Rashi on Ayin Hey Amud Beis, Rashi says, why is it that beating the thread, the weft thread, is part of oireg, and yet zoira, boirer, and merakeid are considered separate malacha? It says Rashi on Ayin Hey that zoira, boirer, merakeid are different because you utilize these activities on different material. How's that? Zoira are on the stalks, boirer are on pebbles, and merakeid is on flour. So Rashi seems to be saying an andera maisa. Rashi says a completely different story over here. Rashi says the way you categorize malacha is not what tool you use, but on what type of material you're doing the activity. So Rashi on Ayin Gimel says the way you categorize malacha is based on the instrument, and Rashi on Ayin Hey says the way you categorize malacha is on what type of material you're doing the malacha. So we have a major machlokes between the Sefer Shavisas HaShabbos and the Eglei Tal. The Eglei Tal, of course, I was familiar with. Eglei Tal is written by Rabbi Avram Bornstein, the Rebbe of Sachachav, the author of Shas Tshuvas Avnei Nezar. However, I must humbly admit that I was not familiar with the Sefer Shavisas HaShabbos, and I did a little research. And very interested, we've quoted him before, but I can't say that I was familiar with the author. The Shvisas HaShabbos was written by Rabbi Yitzchak Meltzen. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Meltzen is a very notable individual. He was born in 1854. He lived till 1916. He was a Lithuanian Rav, one of the youngest students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and a proponent of the Musar movement. Now, he was also a Moirat Tzedek in Kelm, and he was a Ram in Radin, in the yeshiva in Radin. Now, he ultimately moved to Eretz Yisrael, and he lived in the Strauss Chatzar. Next time I go to Eretz Yisrael, I have on my list, I want to go to the Strauss Chatzar. That's where Rabbi Itzla Petterberg lived. That's where all the Balei Musar lived in Yerushalayim. Chatzar Strauss. The famous picture of Rabbi Itzla Petterberg going up the steps, he's going up the stairwell in Chatzar Strauss. Anyway, he wrote a famous sefer that I'm very well familiar with, acquainted with, and that, as many, by the way, if I may, we have a shiur every Friday at 11 o'clock on Tefillah, 10:30 in Gemara, and recently we've been quoting from the Siach Yitzchak. The Siach Yitzchak is the commentary in the Siddur Hagra, written by Rabbi Yitzchak Meltzen. Rabbi Yitzchak Meltzen has a commentary on the Siddur in the Siddur Hagra. He also wrote, by the way, his father was Reb Shmuel Meltzen, the Maggid of Slutsk. His father put together the Even Shlema of the Vilna Gaon. So he was well known for the Siach Yitzchak. I was not familiar that he wrote the Shvisas HaShabbos. But again, back to the stira, and basically we're going to see there are two ways of approaching the stira. Again, Rashi and Ayin Gimel says the way you define malacha is by the instrument that's used. Rashi and Ayin Hey says the way you define malacha is by the material that you act upon. Comes the Shvisas HaShabbos, and he says Rashi on Ayin Gimel Amid Beis is the main way to categorize malacha. Malacha is categorized by what kind of tool you use. You use a pitchfork, that's zoira. Use your hand, that's boirer. You use a sieve, that's merakeid. Why does Rashi on Daf Ayin Hey talk about different materials? Rashi is answering a different question. Rashi is just explaining why the Mishnah lists them separately. Why are they listed separately? Why is each one a separate shame? Each one is a separate category because they're done on different material. But if you want to know not why it's a separate category, now after the fact that it's a separate category, how do you categorize other activities? Other activities are categorized by the tool that is used. That is the shita of the Shvisas HaShabbos, that at the end of the day, the way we categorize any other activity is based on the tool that is used. However, the Eglei Tal disagrees, and he understands that the main characteristic of defining malacha is determined by what type of material you're acting upon. Why does Rashi emphasize the different types of tools? Rashi is just telling you the typical way the malacha is done, but in no way does the tool that is used, in no way would it define the malacha. So now I'm going to share a Gemara with you, and I want you to tell me, does this Gemara sound like the Eglei Tal, or does this Gemara sound like the Shvisas HaShabbos? The Gemara is on Ayin Dalet Amud Aleph. The Gemara says Tanur Rabbanan. If you had different kinds of food in front of you, you could select and eat, select and put away. But don't select, and if you did, you're chayav v'chatas. So the Gemara says you just contradicted yourself. You said, the Gemara says you could select and eat, select and put away, but don't select and eat. So the Gemara brings the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. You're allowed to select and eat with your hand. You could select and eat with a funnel. You could select and eat with your hand. If you're going to use a funnel or a large plate, don't select, but if you do, it's only in a Isser D'Rabbanan. But if you use a sieve, don't select, and if you did boirer, you're chayiv a carbon chatas. So the Gemara basically says three categories. You're allowed to select with your hand. You're not allowed to select the chadchila in a funnel. If you did, it's only Isser D'Rabbanan. And then the third madrega is don't select with a sieve. If you did, it's boirer. So Bishlama, according to Eglei Tal, where it's irrelevant what kind of tool you use, all it depends on is the material. So this is talking about you're selecting impurity, you're selecting out a pebble. So it doesn't matter that you use a sieve, it's selecting, it's boirer. Because according to the Eglei Tal, the tool that is used is irrelevant. But according to the Shvisas HaShabbos, where the way you categorize malacha is if it's a pitchfork, it's zoira. If it's your hand, it's boira. If it's a sieve, it's merakeid. Then why does the Gemara say if you use a sieve, the halacha is if you use a sieve, it's boirer. It's not boirer if you use a sieve, it's merakeid if you use a sieve, according to the Shvisas HaShabbos. So the Shvisas HaShabbos deals with this question, says Rabbi Yitzchak Meltzin, that's what the Gemara means. The Gemara means you're allowed to select with your hand, and if you select with a sieve, you're chayav achatos, but not for selecting, but for merakeid. Doesn't really fit into the Gemara that well, but that's how he defends himself. Okay, now we move to another Gemara. This Gemara is found on Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, going on to Kuf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph. The Mishnah says on Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, don't suspend a mishamer, a strainer on Yom Tov, and don't strain on Shabbos. You're not to strain wine on Shabbos. So the Gemara says if someone is about to strain on Shabbos, let's say he wants to strain out impurities from wine, what do we warn him? Pal, don't do this, otherwise you're going to violate X. What is the X? What are we warning him that he might come to violate? So the Gemara records a machlokes between Rabbi and Reb Zera. Rabbi says, we tell the guy it's boirer. Reb Zera says, we tell the guy it's merakeid. Rabbi says, I'm right. I am more logical. I am more reasonable. Why? Because what is boirer? Boirer is you're taking out the food and you're leaving the refuse. Here also, you're taking the food, you're taking the wine, and you're leaving the psoiles. The wine drips through, you're going to take out the wine, and you leave with the refuse. So just like a boirer, you take the food and you leave the refuse, this is what you're doing over here, and therefore Rabbah says, it is mistaber, it is more logical that what you're doing over here is boirer. Reb Zera says, no, I am more logical. What are you doing when you do merakeid? Merakeid, the refuse is on top, and the food is on the bottom. Here also, the refuse is on top and the food is on the bottom. The simple way of reading this Gemara is each opinion is mutually exclusive. Rabbah holds it's boirer and not merakeid. Reb Zera holds it's merakeid and not boirer. Rabbah holds it's boirer and not merakeid because you're taking the food out and you're leaving the refuse. Reb Zera says it is merakeid and not boirer because the refuse stays on top. Here by Merakeid, and that's what you're doing over here. Comes Rashi. You ever hear of Rashi? Rashi, the great commentator on the Gemara. Rashi says a chidush. Rashi says a novel ruling. That Rabbah agrees that you could warn the guy for sifting. Rabbah agrees that you're sifting over here, because at the end of the day, the refuse is on the top. Rabbah just holds it's also boirer. And Reb Zera says, no, it ain't boirer. Why? Because boirer, the food's on the top, and the refuse is on the bottom, and here the refuse is on the top. So since the refuse is on the top, it's only sifting. Rabbah holds no, it's also boirer. I agree it's sifting, but it's also boirer. And Reb Zera says, no, it's only sifting. And Rabbah doesn't say it's only boirer, Rabbah holds it's also boirer. What about the Rambam? The very interesting Rambam. We read this Rambam in the beginning of the Shiur. The Rambam said in the beginning of the Shiur, in Hilchos Shabbos, Parak Ches Halacha Yud Aleph, says the Rambam, one who selects shemarim, refuse, sediment from a liquid, it's either boirer or merakeid. Says the Beis Yosef, the Rambam agrees to Rashi. that Rabbi is of the opinion that when you take sediment out of wine, it's both boirer and Merakeid. It's Merakeid because the refuse stays on top, and it's boirer because you take away the food. And the Rambam is paskening like Rabba, and that's why the Rambam says either it's boirer or it's Merakeid, meaning it's both. However, the Chafetz Chaim disagrees. And the Chafetz Chaim says, no, Rambam disagrees with Rashi. And the Rambam holds, that Rabba holds, it's only boirer. And Reb Zera holds, it's only Merakeid. And the Rambam is mesupak, he's in question, he's not confident. Do we paskin like Rabba that it's boirer, or do we paskin like Reb Zera that it's Merakeid? Now Rashi learned Rabba held it was also Merakeid. It was boirer and Merakeid. Now why does the Chafetz Chaim hold that Rabba holds it's not Merakeid? Why would this not be Merakeid? The Chafetz Chaim says a very important and fundamental rule, and then we're going to come to understanding the essence of the malacha and some of the halacha l'maisa. Today's shiur, there's a lot of sort of lamdos as the introduction. And that is the Chafetz Chaim says, the reason why Rabba would say it's considered Merakeid, it's boirer, selecting, and it's not Merakeid, is because normally when you sift, you're doing an action on the refuse and the food together. You shake the sieve, and by doing so, one species gets mixed from its friend. But over here, what you're doing is you're pouring the wine through the sieve. So nothing's happening to the wine. The only thing that you're acting upon are the shmarim. And therefore, this is not considered Merakeid. Merakeid is only when you act on both the oichel and the psoiles. But in this case, you're only acting upon the psoiles, and therefore Rabbah would hold, according to the Rambam, according to the Bir Halacha, that it is only boirer and it is not Merakeid. Now we're going to come to discuss a few very relevant halachos. What exactly is the essence of sifting? It used to be back in the day when people didn't know any better, they ate sugar. Now they know sugar is probably the most harmful thing you could put into your body. It's practically worse than any known substance to man other than cyanide. So if you have a choice between sugar and cyanide, you should go with the sugar. But if it's sugar and anything else, but back in the day they didn't realize this, and they have something called confectionery sugar or icing sugar. And to facilitate sprinkling, you want to use like a sieve. Instead of, what are you going to do? Pick up some and then throw it on the cake? While you're at it, why don't you throw it on your kids, throw it on your family, your cousins, people you don't like at the table? No, just joking. Don't invite people you don't like to the table. But are you allowed to use a sieve to sprinkle confectionery sugar on food? You're basically sifting. The thing is, you're not sifting anything. It's all falling through the cracks. So you're not really selecting anything. You're just using the sieve to facilitate sprinkling. So the question is selecting an essential part of sifting, or is selecting irrelevant? The nafkamina would be double filtering your wine or your water. Let's say you have water that's perfectly drinkable. In New York, we have special treats in our water. We have millions of copepods, which add a lot of flavor and taste. Just imagine, in every cupful of New York City water, there are microorganisms that potentially could be carrying who knows what, but for the most part, other than a problem of toilaim, which is questionable, but there are copepods in the water. Now, let's say you hold halachically it's permissible. I'm not saying it is. Many poskim say it's an issue. Some poskim say it's not an issue. Let's say you hold it's not an issue. Fine. And you happen to like the way they taste, but you want to filter the water. So you're filtering and you're sifting, but it's not really an important job. Well, what if you're not filtering or sifting at all? You're just sprinkling. Can you use a sieve to sprinkle on Shabbos? So we mentioned the Gemara. The Gemara says, Zoira, Boirer, Toichen, and Merakeid, are all the same thing. So they're all mafresh oichel menapsos. They're all taking the food out of the refuse. That seems to indicate that taking out the refuse is an essential part of Merakeid. But if you look in the Gemara in Beya and Avchav Tesam Beis, the Gemara says as follows: Tan Rabbanan ein shoinin kamach b'yamtef. You cannot re-sift flour on Yom Tov. Rav Papayas and the name and Rabbi Huda ben Beseira say you are allowed to re-sift flour. Everybody agrees that if a rock or a pebble fell in, you're allowed to sift it on Yom Tov. Says Rashi that you're not allowed to sift flour. It was sifted yesterday and you want to sift it again to make it nicer. Yeah, you could have done it yesterday. But the Rabbi Papayas and Rabbi Huda say you're allowed to re-sift flour because it's not a tercha, and everybody knows it's the second time, and this is not considered sifting for selecting. That's the key. The key is if you want to re-sift flour, like Michael asked before, why are you re-sifting something that you sifted before? And the answer is, it's only to make it nicer, finer, but it's perfectly usable if you don't do so. So Rashi enunciates the principle that this is not similar to sifting because you're not taking out any refuse. And by the way, the Magen Avram also says, our flour that's already been sifted, and there's no bran, there's nothing coarse, you could possibly sift it on Shabbos. You hear this? You have a guy, and he's sifting. He has flour in his sieve, and we say, Rabbi, if we had our court system and we would warn you not to do this, we would have to throw you off the 2-story building and then throw stones at you. He says, don't you know? I bought this flour in the store. It's kemach flour. It's already sifted. It's pre-sifted. I'm not doing anything. Don't you know the Magen Avram?
Rabbi, but if you're sifting confectionery sugar using the sieve on Shabbos, you're doing it because there may be parts in the confectionery sugar which are larger than what the sieve would allow. And for you, even though for others it might be they don't care, but for you, you don't want that on the cake or whatever it is you're sifting it. So isn't it soulless for you
okay,
in that case?
We're going to come to that argument. Usually confectionery sugar, it's not really clumped up. It's separate for the most part.
Let's assume that was the
But
case.
one second, I'm going to come to that. I will come to that. But, like when the gardener comes and he plants seeds, so he could easily take a handful of seeds and toss it. But he's not going to get like an even sprinkling. So he has this machine that he churns that it sort of gives an even sprinkling of the seeds so he could evenly seed the field. I would think that's what a sieve does to the confectionery sugar. But Reb Joe, we're going to bring up your argument when it comes to basically a salt shaker, where often you have clumps of salt. So now, if the salt is all fine, everyone would agree you could l'chayra sprinkle your salt from a salt shaker because you're not using the salt shaker to select, you're just doing it to get an even sprinkle. But what if you have, there might have been some moisture in the salt. So now you have clumps of salt. Is that considered refuse and food? Or is that all food? And that's a matter of great debate. The Chayyim says, if there is no psoilas at all, for example, you have flour of matzah that's ground up, and you have some clumps, and you want the clumps to separate, exactly what you said, Joe. But the case here is you have a matzah flour, and you want the clumpy pieces to separate. Even though if you would break it apart, there would be no grinding here because there's no tchina in something, there's no grinding in something that was already ground, but you're not allowed to sift it on Shabbos, midrabanan. So the Chayyim seems to say that if you have clumps of flour and you want to use some kind of sieve, you cannot sift it. So the Chai Adam seems to classify a clump of flour as psoiles with oichel. The Sefer Imrei Shabbos says that from the Chai Adam you see an interesting halacha, that even though Merakeid D'Oraisa is selecting, taking the psoiles from the oichel, but at least on the Drabanan level, if you're not separating the oichel, but if you're using a sieve for anything, it is aser. Now, I would still argue that if you're using the sieve to sprinkle confectionery sugar, you're just using the sieve as a sprinkler. That in no way is sifting. But if you have clumps, even though you're not taking out what is called psoiles, but there is a degree of separation taking place, and I would think that would be different. So it comes out like this, that clumps of... Okay, it comes out like this. To sprinkle sugar through a sieve is permitted. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, it's brought in Shmir Shabbos Kalchasa, Parsha Aleph, Ois Mem Daled. He says, Mutter livzoik avgas sukar. You're allowed to livzoik. You know what the word livzoik means? Lashon of to sprinkle. Confectionery sugar, icing sugar on cake on Shabbos, even if you use a sieve to enable the sprinkling, because there no selecting is taking place at all. However, what if you have a salt shaker? You know the kind of salt shaker that the kids, they rub their hands all over and then they get near the sink, the kind of salt shaker that has clumps of salt in it. So now by shaking the salt, you're selecting between the fine granules and the clumps. So it is the opinion of the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa that is also mutter. That is also mutter. Now that would seem to be not like the Chai Adam, because the Chai Adam says if you have clumps of flour and you want to get out the fine grains and you want the clumps, so to speak, to break apart, that is an issue of Merakeid. Rav Shlomo Zalman is lenient regarding that. Rabbi Ribiat, in his Lamed Tes Malachos book, says, no, you cannot use a salt shaker on Shabbos that has clumps of salt in it. So regarding the clump case, it seems that Rav Shlomo Zalman was lenient. Rabbi Ribiat, in his book, is stringent. It seems like the Chai Adam is stringent, but you do have what to rely on, even if your salt shaker is not perfectly granuled. You would be allowed to use it, at least according to Rav Shlomo Zalman. However, this is the most difficult case, namely, if you have pieces of rice in your salt shaker, and to absorb the moisture, and shaking the salt shaker, now you're really selecting between the granules and the rice. The rice is not something you want. You don't want rice in your soup, especially not rice that's 6 months old. Or you don't want whatever in your cholent. Most people don't want rice in their cholent. And therefore that would be more of an issue. By the way, the Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa brings that there may be an argument that any kli that is used to sift for immediate eating use would be permitted. However, so a salt shaker is used to, you shake it in and then you eat immediately. However, the conclusion of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is that if there's rice in it, you should not use a salt shaker on Shabbos. If there are just clumps in it, you are allowed to use it. But again, not everybody agrees to that. This is based on the principle that Merakeid is not just using a sieve, but Merakeid is using a sieve with an element of selecting. Okay, but as we mentioned, if your sink has an aerator, where in 99% of the cases the aerator is not doing anything, but there is a question, Rabbi Isai. I'm still with you. Don't hang up on me. If most cases that sometimes city water gets disturbed and there's excessive sediment and some of the metals get a seep into the water, and then you do want the aerator to get out some of the coloring, or sometimes, so it will come out like this. If you want to put a sheet over your sink, Why? It's just better, but I would drink it without it. You could do that. However, if you want to get out some kind of discoloration, that's already an issue. Okay, friends, it's been real. Thanks everyone for joining. And Bez Hashem next week, Meleches Toichein. And thank you everybody. Shkayach. Rabbi, how are you?
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.